أكثر استعداد للمرض النفسي هو ما يسمى بالكوجنيتيف ديزونانس، لما أنت تفكر بشيء وتسلك شيء ثاني، فأنت very traditional مرتبط وايد بقيم مجتمعك، ولكن تسلك سلوك في حداثة، أو العكس. هنا يحصل نوع من عدم الأدابتيشن في السلوك، وبالتالي يتعرض الإنسان لهذا. فاللي يبغي هذا يعزمني على محاضرة ثانية وأنا بشرح لكم القصة. كنا نتحدث، تحبين نتوقف هنا؟
Just a little about your museum, and if in Rome نتوقف هنا, because what you said was very important and extremely relevant to the UAE, but maybe less so in France. Dr. Rafia has said that the depression rate has increased because of the level of change that has happened here in the UAE. Is that why, in your feeling, the preservation of culture is important, because they feel a disconnect between their culture or how their culture is meant for the future? And what spurred France? I'll first say that to Dr. Rafia, but then my other question to Madame Pegard is, what spurred France to want Versailles as a national museum? Is it pride? Is it heritage? What is the spurs? And France is very proud of its national heritage. So many buildings are preserved. So many things are under the umbrella of preservation. Why is that connection with culture and preservation of the past so important for France? But first I'd like to know, why is it so important to preserve culture? Do you think if we had more institutions such as your Women's Museum here in the UAE, the depression rates would be decreased?
It's not just through the Women Museum, but through all effort, through curriculum, through activity. The healthy person is that one who is very attached to his culture. Even if you want to be globalized and open to the whole world, but still, if you are not standing in really very solid society with its culture, tradition, and heritage, you feel lost. My effort actually is beyond just the Women Museum. I will come to that later on. But culture is an environment for any person to really adjust his life accordingly.
Madame Pegard, why is France, we understand why it's so proud of its cultural heritage, it's beautiful, but why is it so attached to it and attached to preserving it?
I think it's for you.
Je crois que Madame...
I think that Madame has just answered to the question. Every country is attached to its culture, and we all need it. We all have these roots. Earlier, I was thinking of a definition that we could give to culture. It's very difficult. However, there is one that I bring up, but I refuse, is that we say culture is a supplement to the soul. It's like a cherry on the cake. A French expression to say that, for example, culture is an ingredient of life. I know that if culture brings us pleasure, culture is part of humanity. It is what brings us forward. It helps us understand the others. Culture helps us understand our culture, helps us understand the other's culture. I don't know anybody not interested I don't think one person who is interested in the French culture could not wish to know more about another country's culture. Within a lot of departments, it is important for us. At a touristic level, it's an asset, an economical asset for France. And I think that the reason in our country that we have such a consciousness of culture and why we need to move forward together, it's also what helps us understand the rest of the world. Culture is not folding back on oneself and wanting to preserve it and protect it, but on the contrary, open up to the world. I think that Louis XIV, when he built Versailles, he wanted that most of the biggest, largest artists in the world come to Versailles, that the creators of the world come to Versailles and use the experience of others to create within this venue that became a center point for the world. And it was the idea of a man, but not... Of course, through this idea, he wanted to show his power and his shine on the world, but it was also a way to grasp creation, innovation, and the enrichment of its time. And when our Minister of Finance, for example, Emmanuel Macron, comes to Versailles and holds a conference on French technology, he demonstrates the continuity to where we defend our culture, and which has been our culture since the 18th century, and that continues today to irrigate our ideas of France, but not only our ideas. It's also the dream of each and every one of us who comes and manages to see within Versailles its realization. It's important that each one who comes to Versailles can find what he's looking for, can find his own desire. For one, it can be the furniture of 18th century, and that has inspired most of the best designers of the world. Maybe for another, it can be discovering the gardens and exploring its landscape, or maybe come and see an exhibition of contemporary art. And it has to portray constantly what we see within our history, and it brings us back to our history. And I know that the past has always irrigated our present, and our present helps us prepare for the future. And there is no contradiction and no way in upsetting anybody when we say that we defend the past, we defend the present. And it is very interesting to hear that despite our difference in culture, we are seeking the same thing.
Point to say that Versailles was made not to only show his power, but to also bring the rest of the world's attention to France and the rest of the creativity and innovators to France. There are two types of culture, and I'm going to be very broad. There's a tangible and intangible. I think Versailles is tangible, such as buildings, such as books, such as manuscripts. How do you preserve that? How the teams that you have, the funding that you need, it is not an easy proposition to do that. And then, Dr. Rafia, you have, I think, the more difficult approach of how to defend or keep intangible cultures such as oral traditions, because the traditions of the UAE have been given from generation to generation, usually orally. And how do you preserve it in a proper manner? How do you collect it in an accurate manner? So because our panel is about preservation of culture for future generation, what goes behind the splendor that we see in Versailles? How many times do people come in to relook at the gold paint, the woodwork? What is the preservation that is needed and the teams needed, and where do they come from? Do you need to get international people to help you as well?
You want...
Alors, je crois que vous avez dit la chose la plus importante.
I think you have said the most important, you have raised the most important point. So what is important today is to preserve Versailles and to conserve it. We cannot transmit, we cannot share to future generations something that has been damaged or something that has been lost. And the miracle of Versailles is that despite history, despite revolution, the French Revolution, despite wars, and despite times where Versailles was damaged, Versailles has nevertheless survived, thanks to the willingness of each and every individual who has this wish that Versailles survives. Today, we have 1,000 people who work in Versailles. We have 52 different professions in Versailles, and every day in Versailles, we repair something. We open a new room. We fix something. Last year, we opened 10 new rooms, which was a work of Louis XV, and it was a huge task to actually rebuild the furniture, refix it, refurbished it, and the rooms. That is today what makes Versailles what it is. It's a castle that is not empty. Tomorrow, for example, during the month of March, we're going to open another gallery in Versailles. And we're going to restore everything. We're going to restore the leathers. We're going to restore the Carrosse of Versailles, and this is going to demonstrate that within this gallery it will be open to the public. Our mission, our task is to demonstrate this culture, and in order for us to transmit, to share this knowledge, it's throughout the time. Through oral culture, it's very difficult to share this knowledge and to share this culture. I'm going to make you smile probably, but you know, we have just created an exhibition for the 300 years, celebrating the 300 years of the death of Louis XIV. And I know we were representing the era of Louis XIV. He was buried the 24th of October in Saint-Denis, and the whole decorum. We built a whole scene representing how it was back then. But what I'm trying to say is that this exhibition that was gathering artworks from around the world, we have borrowed statues, we have borrowed paintings. There were just two elements that dated from his date of death. There was a piece of the stone that used to close his tomb, and that piece of plaque was changed into a pan, and this was demonstrated, a piece of the stone that was closing his tomb, and we have a small piece of his final will. Those were the only pieces that were actually from then. Everything has been restored, rebuilt from the contemporary artists who were retelling the story, but the only pieces that remained from his era were only these two little things. And today, even with these little things, we are capable of creating an exhibition on him. And it's a story of transmitting this culture and gaining and preserving our historical heritage. And this is which leads us here today.
It's interesting to note that even Versailles has problems with getting enough things. Can you tell us about how important oral history and oral culture is to your museum and to the UAE culture in general? Does it comprise 70% of it? And how did you go about gathering it, and how do you go about displaying it in your museum for people to understand?
Interesting question. The
مجتمع الإمارات العربية
society يعني مجتمع إنساني قديم.
It's
Piece of stone in Sharjah في مليحة last month, which is I think from 2000 year. However, الناس, the people living in this society is so small. It's tribes moving from one place to another. And when they discovered the oil in the late 60 or 64, everything is going into development. People were not thinking about what they have to keep and what they have to demolish. They want everything new. They want to move to a new life. Unfortunately, at that time, many beautiful buildings demolished. Very few, which was
That were 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. يمكن بس الشندقة ومنطقة الفهيدي اللي بقوا يعني.
perhaps only Shindag and Fedi remained. But what's most dangerous than that is the elder people. This woman, when I met her, she was 97 years old, but she was alert and she had an intact
كنت أخذ
memory.
منها كثير من المعلومات وهكذا يعني. رغم أني مشغولة في وظيفتي السابقة كرئيسة جامعة، بس كنت الويك اند في دبي وبس ألف على الناس اللي أعرفهم. ما خليت بيت في رجل مسن أو امرأة مسنة ما جلست وشغلت تليفوني. طبعا ما استأذنهم، لأن لو استأذنتهم ما مشكلة، وهذا not ethical، بس it's fine. It's for the sake of my country.
For the sake of research.
Yes. لكن الحقيقة كما قالوا يعني في اليونسكو إن مع وفاة أي شخص مسن أنت تقضي على مكتبة كاملة. لكن الله وفقني في لقاءات كثيرة ولا زال عندي ماتيريال. من خلال هذا جمعنا كثير من المعلومات. على سبيل المثال اليوم الشيخ عبد الله بن زايد تكلم عن جدته سلامة بنت بطي القبيسي. سلامة بنت بطي نعرف اسمها ونعرف بعض المعلومات عنها، لكن لما بديت أروح لهم حتى رحت للشيوخات وللشيوخ، من هي سلام بنت بطيء؟ لماذا هي مهمة؟ ليش تسمون بناتكم عليها؟ فأعطوني هيستوري أنا بالنسبة لي جديد. ولما خبرت بالشيخ عبد الله زار المتحف، هو كذلك تفاجأ. الشيخة سلامة بنت بطيء كانت فترة زمنها 1920 وما قبل ذلك حروب بين قبائل وصراعات وإلى آخره، والذي يحكم هو الأقوى وليس الأصلح. فبمجيئها هي مع أبنائها حلفتهم على القرآن، لا تختلفوا بالعنف، الأصلح يحكم. ولذلك من ذاك الوقت 1924 حتى اليوم المنطقة استقرت سياسيا نتيجة حكمة امرأة شافت في هذه المسألة. فمثل هذه المعلومات دكتورة لميس ثروة بس ما حد يعرفها.
How do you relate that in your museum?
The display يعني في الميوزيوم اللي زاروا الميوزيوم you will visit maybe 10 panels in one place. Women in politics, women in economy, women in education, and everything. And everything have a story. But because the space is so small that you cannot display everything, what we did
كل شيء فما
is
قمنا
now we are
به.
working in
نحن نعمل
encyclopedia, which
الآن
take me
على
now
تطوير
5 years.
انسايكلوبيديا.
But
استغرقتني
إن شاء
5
الله
سنوات
soon
إلى
it
الآن،
will be
ولكن إن
ready,
شاء الله
which
ستكون
cover
جاهزة
all the
قريبا
information
وستغطي كافة
in detail
المعلومات
about every woman. And
بالتفصيل
the
حول
museum is
كل
there.
امرأة.
But then
ولكن
I found that also
وجدت بعد ذلك أيضا
you need also to make
أننا بحاجة
your document is scientifically right.
أن
So I
تكون
said I went
الوثائق
to the
علمية.
British library in
زرت
Britain to find any document.
المكتبة البريطانية في
Britain
إنجلترا
were
للعثور على وثائق.
influencing
بريطانيا
this part
ومع
of the world for 150
تأثيرها أو نفوذها في هذه
years.
المنطقة
Not
لأكثر من
military,
150 سنة، ليس
but
عسكريا،
they were controlling
فإنهم
the-
كانوا يسيطرون على
And interestingly, when I went
المنطقة.
there,
والمثير للاهتمام عندما
everything,
زرت
every day
هذه
is
المكتبة
documented.
كل يوم وكل شيء
That person
موثق.
visits
هذا
the
الشخص
ruler.
زار
That person
الحاكم،
have
وهذا
a fight with
الشخص
this person.
كان له نزاع
Everything. And
أو
that
إشكال
person
مع
died.
الشخص
And
الآخر،
that
وهذا
person
الشخص
gives him,
توفي، وهذا الشخص أعطاه
تطعيم.
Vaccination.
vaccination.
So interesting. And out of
كل
this
شيء كان مثير
information
للاهتمام. من
from the
هذه
British,
المعلومات التي أخذتها
يعني
من
they-
المكتبة
we thank
البريطانية،
them for this,
نشكرهم
although it was not
على
for the
ذلك،
purpose
على
to
الرغم
preserve
أنها
our
ليست
history,
لغرض
but it's
الحفاظ على
it's
إرثنا،
useful
ولكنها
for us.
كانت مفيدة
This
بالنسبة
actually
لنا.
brings me to something else. You said
هذا
you're
يدفعني
writing an
للطرح عن سؤال
encyclopedia.
آخر. قلت أنت
I would like to say, why don't you make it available on the internet so
It
the
is.
whole world? Oh, it is. And
Yeah.
that's my next question and my next thought. Madame Peygarde, what are the challenges you have or you face in preserving Versailles? And has technology and the digital age made it easier or harder? I know you have a virtual tour of Versailles that people can come to. And how many visitors a day do you get digitally, and how many do you get from or who actually come to Versailles? And how has the future generation embraced Versailles? Have they embraced Versailles?
Alors, je crois qu'il y a effectivement deux questions.
I think indeed there are two questions that you raised here. First of all is how do we preserve this venue, and how do we help the future generations? You know, it's a huge task because Versailles is huge. It's 800 acres. It's 70 kilometers of wall surrounding Versailles, and it's a constant construction site. I think I have always known it under construction, and when you remove one work site, you create another, and the task is to always find a way to maintain this beautiful venue. And if we don't care for it, we will lose it, and we will lose the history for the future generations. And when it comes to the digital world, I think it helps us raise awareness of this place for other generations who are not necessarily very open to visit the castle of Versailles. For a French person, visiting the estate of Versailles is being in school, and we visit it, and we eventually come back to it when we have kids. But in between one moment and another, we never come back. So I do realize that we have less young French people who come than young Chinese who come to visit Versailles. The average age of the visitor the French visitor is 49-year-old, whereas a Chinese visitor is around 32-year-old. So the appetite of discovering, of willingness to discover Versailles is always something that we want to develop within the French community. France is one of the major, the French are one of the major consumers of digital tools, and therefore we are providing a new type of information for those who come to visit Versailles. For example, I keep on bringing up the death of our king, but during the agony of this king, we have sent out tweets. Nobody today reads the memories of Saint-Simon. But on the contrary, we tweeted information and we were putting on social media how the death of the king was happened, and it was a new way for us to tell the story of how things happened in the past, but with the words and vocabulary that we currently use today. We have also tried to gather information and documents and put them all into digital format, and it's something that takes a lot of time. And in anywhere, when we try to document the archives that we have, you have to at the same time use the social networks and the digital networks to conserve this information and transfer this information. Like you raised it earlier, when it comes to the digital sector, we widen the circle of those who are discovering our culture, and we reach out to generations who don't open a book, but would switch on a tablet, whether they be in China, in the States, or here, to see what is happening at the same time in Versailles. It's a task that is constantly under development. We have 2 working sites today, the real sites to preserve the site, and the virtual working sites where we want to transmit the reality of this venue.
I'm going to mention it again because we are so proud of what you've done. The Women's Museum is your individual effort to conserve. You've done everything yourself. And before you had opened, I remember I came and you were kind enough to give me a tour, and you had your young nephew with you who was working side by side with you. And this is amazing. He's younger than I am. And I thought it was very smart of you to have the younger generation with you and help you in putting the museum together. You have so many oral, I want to know, who comes to see your museum? Are they mostly from the UAE? Are they mostly tourists? And I know you just said you want more space. What would you want more of? More space, and what kind of digital technology do you think helps now? Or are smaller museums really in need of space first? And maybe digital technology later?
Sure, but give me just 2 minutes to continue. It was not just, and I started long time ago before the Women Museum to document the traditional type of medicine in my society. And poetry, when about a man, when about women, and His Highness really appreciate this effort because of his love to poetry in general, but for specific this lady, Aisha bint Khalifa. And even when I was writing the book, I asked a few of you, the very young journalists from Al Bayan and other newspapers, come sit with me, listen to the story of this lady and write an article. And that was included because I want to pass this message to the young generation. Alhamdulillah, it's been very successful. Jewelry, this is last month publication. All the old type of jewelry, which is so beautiful, we are not using it anymore. Now it is in a book. And film, I produced 3 movies, and one about education, and one about women of the 60s, and one about Dubai in 1960. All the material, I found them, a collection that my mother used to have. She have a cinema, a camera. And from out of that material, we process now so many interesting material.
So you're really preserving it.
Everything.
right
This,
now.
this one is actually the previous one is the clothes. For example, I discovered there is 96 names for the different type of clothes. But instead of keeping them like a shop, I asked Dr. Najat and Fatma Louta, both famous artists from Dubai, to convert them to art so the young generation can enjoy this. Fatma convert two thobe to a sculpture of woman. And Najat create this beautiful artwork which is in the museum.
So your preservation of culture is taking on a more modern approach, where Versailles would never think of taking Marie Antoinette's maybe old dresses and allowing someone to tamper, or am I wrong?
Si, si,
Okay.
oui. Est-ce que je peux dire qu'on a la même approche?
We have the same approach. We actually have the same approach, and it's very funny to see what you're saying and to hear what you're saying, because actually we try to attract the look in the eyes of people today on what has happened in the past by doing this kind of transmission. And two examples come to my mind. One of them is regarding the children. A few years ago, we had a contemporary art exhibition of a Portuguese artist, Joana Vasconcelos. And Joana Vasconcelos, she always brings up very colorful artwork with a lot of material, and we organized for school children a visit of her exhibition, and they had to draw chairs or thrones or sofas. That was the theme that was inspired from the exhibition they had just seen. And what was very funny was that indeed they saw the material and all those shiny sparkles of Joana Vasco, because she had also taken her inspiration from the materials of Versailles, but they built these thrones and chairs exactly on the model of Versailles. So by looking at this contemporary art, they still came back. They still went back to looking at everything that was around them and to imagine the materials of contemporary art on furniture of the past. And I think that this is an example that resembles very much the example you just raised. And the second example was that we realized that furniture from the 18th century, who are one of the most prestigious pieces of furniture that we have in our collections today, and they inspire designers today. And we have created a campaign towards designers today who, from these pieces of furniture, by taking the measurements of this piece of furniture, the furniture boule, they have recreated pieces of furniture that have nothing to do and all to do with the pieces of furniture of the past, the same way we recreate the dresses and the clothings, etc. And a third example that brings us back to what we have just heard earlier, we have decided to create an exhibition based on the dresses of Marie Antoinette. We have asked the creators today to present a collection that was inspired by the dresses of Marie Antoinette, which is why Karl Lagerfeld, Galliano have exhibited dresses at Versailles that were inspired by the dresses of Marie Antoinette. So bringing the past to build the present, the idea is the same.
We've got 5 minutes left, and I know we've got so many questions. However, I'd like to leave everyone with this parting thought that no matter what culture people are part of, one thing is for certain, it will change. Culture is no longer fixed. It is more fluid in motion. So it'll be interesting to see how the future generations will preserve the diverse culture nowadays. It'll be interesting to note also whether they think it's important or not to spend funds on this. We didn't even touch on how you personally spent money on your museum and how much governmental funding is needed to preserve culture. Do we spend it on culture or development of the future? We have 5 minutes for questions from the audience. And I present this question to you as well. Is the preservation of culture important to move forward? Any questions?
هناك
I had the privilege Thank you. I had the privilege to live in Paris as an artist for 15 years.
So,
It's not working.
no, everyone can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello? It's working? Okay, I'm so sorry, it's silence. Okay, I had the privilege to live and work in Paris 15 years as an artist, international artist, and now I have the privilege to live and work in Dubai. So this picture is very special for me. If I can also, before my question, mention that France, and it's not because Madame is here, has that extraordinary and unique example of the perseverance and the preservation of the heritage that difficultly we find outside. That savoir-faire that is related with patience and the real engagement with le métier of art is something that is one of the key to build a model that is hegemonical. Every quartier is made with the same sense of illumination. That was like a miracle in art in the entire times. But then now we have the Emirates, which is extremely supersonically building a new society, like you know better than me, is made by multiple like islands of cultures. I have a question for the lady, the doctor.
Question.
Yeah.
How you see deeply this model of multiculturalism, talking about depression, talking about identification and preservation of our own values. Do you think that it succeed, not materially, but intrinsically? The fact that we are trying to put all the talents of all the cultures, but where we are as foreigners, in my case from South America, that it's not the same, excuse me to establish, and I finish here, the parallel about integrating international people. I was the example of ancient French school to be part of one angle.
Can I just add to that question? Because I'm going to take it from another point of view. We haven't yet put down or preserved our own culture. So let's begin with our own culture and then take the multicultural aspect of the UAE. This is my personal opinion, but I leave it to Dr. Rafia to answer that question.
It is a big challenge for this part of the world to adapt to different culture around them. But thanks God that we are very peaceful people, that we appreciate other culture, we enjoy it, as well as we keep our culture. I think the first question you asked me, Dr. Alamis, the role of your museum is to be a space for everybody to come and learn about us. As you know, we are maybe 10 to 15% of the whole community. And we are not very easy to see us. It's not visible because of the geographic distribution. But through art, now you can see how many exhibitions are Dubai and 1,000. It's a mix of culture from all over the world to come here and interact in a very nice and peaceful way. That also the role of the woman. This is our history, that's us, and that's even the woman of this part. And it's something you cannot have access to.
I love what you've said, that culture makes the people of the world come together in a peaceful manner and interact in a peaceful manner, because you can't fight over culture.
Yeah.
I mean, you know. So I love that aspect. And we've got a question here.
Hello, assalamu alaikum. I'm Afra al-Meheri.
لحظة الغالي لحظة. تكنولوجيا اليوم عندنا. Okay.
Okay, I'm Afra
حياك
al-Meheri.
الله.
I'm a young entrepreneur and I also proceeding a career. I recently had my master's in arts and museums, but I'm currently working in the economic sector. I'm trying to shift from that economic to museums and arts, but it's very difficult, that shift. And I know you had that shift as well, Dr. Rafia Gbash. So what advice would you give me to help me to find my path or to go through my path? Because I know I'm going up in my career in economy, but that's not what I want. So what's the advice would you give me, or any any
إذا
young
كان
people
في
here?
حالة من العشق
If you have a passion towards anything, everything is possible. I'll give you an example. I reached the level of a professor, which is the highest in the medicine, and I'm perhaps the first as a psychiatrist in the GCC. But because of this passion, it's not new, it's old, but I'd never had time for it. If you love something, you will be innovative and creative. The economic matter will continue. You can continue with your work and the economic sector, but you have to be close to the environment, which introduces you to arts. I'm not how to display and work in the whole environment. All of these things, I acquired them through experience. Throughout 6 years, I worked with a team of friends. It's true I had professionals, but these friends were students of art in Sharjah University. They had one of the teachers. There was an expert of museums. We meet and chatted, and all of us became experts in museums. Perhaps 4 museums in the UAE come to me to request information how to approach things. So if you love something, you'll be loyal to it. Any love, whether towards a human being or culture or science, you'll be creative and innovative. All you need is love.
If there is.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, most gracious, most compassionate. Assalamu alaikum.
I am one of the rising talents, and my question is for Dr. Rafi Aghbash. How will the digital world affect the museum, and how will you adapt it, and what is the change and the shift, and how will the museum be in the next 15 years?
طبعا الله يعطيني الصحة والعافية for that.
I hope I have enough health and be healthy at that time, but already we spoke about the encyclopedia from 5 years, and I started to write it because it was created in order to be on a available on a touch screen in the museum, and also to be on the virtual world or on an application on the phone, as I have done to the poetries of Aisha bin Osha. Also, it has an application. Currently, I do not want to shift quickly towards technology because
يقولون ماجوريتيون بالفيرتشوال. أنا لا بعدني أبغى هاي، لأن البهجة الفرح اللي يعطيني إياه زيارة شخص للمتحف ما بيعطيني إياه هذا الفيرتشوال. يمكن يعطي أكسس للناس إن يتعرفون على التاريخ، بس هذا الاحتكاك الإنساني ضروري ومهم جدا، خاصة في بداية هذه المشاريع. وأرجو أن نحن في ثقافتنا المحلية أن نحافظ على العلاقة الإنسانية. مهما كانت التكنولوجيا بتخدمنا، ما شيء أجمل من أنك تشوف إنسان وتلمس إيده وتسلم عليه. يعني الآن القمة الحكومية كلها تتكلم عن كيف تتحول الحكومات إلى تكنولوجيا. أنا في رأيي مو بصحيح. يعني في الآخر بعد الدكتور بيسوي التنج تنج وبتعالج أونلاين. لا، لازم تشوفه وتشوف عينه. أنت إذا ما شفت عينه أصلا المريض ما ينفع تعالجه. ولذلك يعني ما عليه في أشياء الآرت مثلا، ممكن أشوف الآرت على لوحة، لكن ستيل يوم تصير معرض وتحس الانرجي مال الناس، هذا روحه يعطيك طاقة. نحن اليوم الصبح هني ما أدري كم ألف حاضرين، يمكن الكلام اللي يقولون السبيكر عادي أقدر أقراه في الإنترنت، بس to be with a group of people to feel their energy، هذا اللي إحنا نطلع فيه.
Thank you, Madame Catherine Perrat,
شكرا
for being here.
مدام
And thank you,
كاترين،
Dr.
وشكرا
Rafi Aghbash. It's
دكتورة
always a
رفيعة
pleasure
أغباش.
to see you.
دائما
And
يسرني أن
thank you to
ألتقي
this
بكما،
wonderful audience.
وشكرا
Thank
لجمهورنا
you.
العزيز. شكرا لكم جميعا.
كان التكنولوجيا اليوم مقيتة. شكرا.